Are you recording? See, this is where I always get the blooper. I'm like, are you recording yet? So now you can, or maybe we can edit that.
Bloopers are good.
Bloopers are great. I plan on doing like a whole blooper reel with all my videos that I've done. So, and keeping them somewhere. All right. So I want to thank y'all all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. Natalie, it's so nice to meet you. I hope you get to come to the rest of these things. And we do hope to continue them even after the summer. So definitely, you'll notice in your little note-taking paper, oh Linda, there's one on the back.
Okay.
At the bottom, there's a place for feedback. If you have any ideas of stuff that you want to talk about, some things that you want me to address, things about this that you wish, were maybe better, just any sort of feedback. Feedback like, that was the most boring thing I've ever sat through.
Oh, no.
Or just anything would be great, because I do want to continue these and I want them to continue to grow and get bigger and better as we go. So tonight we're talking about necessary nutrients for your horse. And, getting started on these is always the hardest part. But necessary nutrients for the horse. And the thing about nutrients is there are nutrients that provide energy for the horse, and there are nutrients that allow the horse's body to function appropriately. And we have to make sure we get all of the necessary nutrients in the proper amounts in order for everything to work for the horse. So in getting started, the first thing I want to do is I want to introduce you, introduce myself. Linda and Aaron know me already, but I'll introduce myself to you. So I am a certified equine nutrition advisor through Legacy Equine Nutrition. I'm not a nutritionist. We save the term nutritionist for those with a PhD that have 12 plus years of education and a whole lot more student loans. But I've been studying equine nutrition for probably about the last 3 or 4 years. And I finally found a certification program that I can go through. I'm currently a level 2 equine nutrition advisor. And in order to be an equine nutrition advisor, we have to go through classes. We have to take a written and oral exam. We have continuing ed for probably about 3 hours every week. Dr. Mote brings in experts in the field to talk to us about things. In fact, this week we just had a researcher, a university professor, all with PhDs, talk to us about everything from pregnancy and fetal programming to joint supplements, which is going to be fun when we get into next month in the supplement talk. So I do continuing education every week, and Dr. Mate's in my corner if I'm call or text away. So it's just great being able to have that resource continuing in my program, because it's not just education and done, everything is continuing. So I do have a disclosure, and that is that I am a dealer for Kentucky Equine Research Products. I don't work for Kentucky Equine Research Products, I work for my clients. However, being a dealer allows me to get discounts on any supplements that I use and any supplements from KER that I choose to recommend to my clients. I don't get anything from that. Again, it's just kind of a little perk of having a business where I do things like this. So, but as far as working for you versus working for a feed company or a supplement company, I work for my client and the horses. Okay, so what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to talk about energy, water, protein, carbohydrates, fat, vitamins, and minerals. So, chances are we're going to be here for the next 8 hours, if everybody is comfortable. And first we're going to define what energy is. Some people choose not to list water as a nutrient, but I do list water as a nutrient because without water, your horse will die in a very, very short period of time. Horse can go probably about 45 days without food. It can only go about 7 without water. So I list that in the realm of necessary nutrients. Protein, where the energy for protein comes from and what it's used for, carbohydrates, fat, vitamins and minerals don't provide any energy, but they do provide a way for your horse's body to work properly. So this is the quote that I practiced on Aaron the other day. This came from 1903, and in my opinion, any scientific statement that is made in 1903 that is still applicable today. It's pretty darn important. So, I could read this to you, but you would be asleep in about 2 minutes. So basically what I'm going to tell you is what Armsby stated in 1903 was the body requires energy to live. In order for that body to utilize energy, it can't use food directly. It has to take food and break it into its individual components. Then it has to break those components into usable components, and then it's converted into the tissues. So, y'all have been wondering where this was going to come into play. So, this is my visual aid for the night. So if you think about this, this is your horse's gastrointestinal system, okay? Comes in at the mouth, goes out onto the floor of your stall, okay? So everything inside this tube is technically outside your horse's body, if you can wrap your mind around that. Because until the body says you can pass from the inside of this tube through the outside of this tube and into the body, it is not usable. Does everybody follow that? Like if I took a hamburger and I just started pushing it down in there, like it doesn't go anywhere because this tube is not letting it be used, okay? Your horse's gastrointestinal system works the same way. There are certain parts of the gastrointestinal system that are designed to absorb things in certain areas. Say for instance, the top part of this tube had holes in it that were circles, okay? And something tried to come out of it that would, or tried to go through it that was a square. It wouldn't be able to go through, correct? Okay? But further down here, there's holes that are made of squares. So what happens when that nutrient gets to that point? It's able to pass through and be utilized by the body. So the horse's body is set up in that way. There are certain places along the gastrointestinal system where certain substrates are designed to be absorbed. If they pass by that before they're absorbed, they don't get absorbed. They just pass right on through onto the stall. Got it? That is a very simple way of describing this very long quote. But again, I have a lot of respect for this guy because anything that's said in 1903 that still stands. Okay, so this is taken out of this fascinating textbook right here. And basically, this is a balance. And in our horses, we have two things that we're trying to maintain. We're trying to maintain the digestive and metabolic processes, okay? Meaning the metabolic processes, which would be things like breathing, running, working, the excretion of stuff from the body. All of those things take energy. So the balance of digestive and metabolic processes, as well as your horse's body condition, their weight, and their temperament, okay? Just like us, you have horses that are high-strung horses that burn a lot of calories. You have horses that are laid-back horses and don't burn a lot of calories. So this is also something we have to take into consideration when we're designing programs for horse nutrition. To do that, we have to balance the energy and feed with the energy required for their maintenance, growth, life stage, such as lactation. So it's a balance. Sometimes you get the balance right. Sometimes you have to tweak it. Sometimes energy levels change. You know, you can design a program for a show horse that's, you know, off work during the winter, but when they start going back into work, it's time to change the calories. It's time to change what they need. So those things have to be looked at. And these are just some examples. Energy requires energy, okay? So energy being output, okay? Energy being the energy that we use to run, to sleep, to walk, to gallop, requires energy being calories from food, okay? So there's energy substrate and there's energy expenditure. Same word, but different meanings. Okay? So the things that determine how much energy your horse needs would be things like life stage and weight. A heavy horse, say Wingo, who's an Oldenburg, takes a lot more calories than Mickey, who's a mini. Those things have to be taken into consideration. Stage of life. A retired pasture pet does not require the same energy as a breeding stallion. Okay? Same goes for activity level. So if you have a horse who's in work, okay, what kind of work are they in? Are they in light work? Are they in medium work? Are they in heavy work? Okay, and these are broken up by the amount of time spent at the walk, the canter, or the gallop, or what we call skill work. And skill work would be things like cutting, reining, jumping, those kinds of things. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So, going on to our first activity of the evening. Okay, and I had this designed to be like a team game thing, but since there's only 3 of us, I think that might be a little odd. So anyway, so the first question of the night, and I do want us to interact and to talk about these things, and please, if you have any questions while I'm talking, this is a very low-key, laid-back, not a big deal thing, please stop me, ask your question, I'll answer it the best I can. Okay, so in your best guess, what stage of life or activity level has the greatest caloric expenditure? A 6-month-old weanling, an endurance horse, a breeding stallion, or the first 2 months of lactation?
I mean, it's a trick question, they all do. But I'm going to go with the 6-month-old because just thinking of Wingo. I don't know. He slept a lot. He played a lot, and he slept a lot. And both of those, I feel like, take energy.
They do take energy.
But
growth is a very is a stage that needs a lot of energy. There's a lot of stuff going on. Anyone who's ever fed a 16-year-old boy knows that a lot of energy is required to grow. Does anybody else have a guess?
I'm going to guess the lactation.
You're going to guess the lactation. You want to go?
You already
Oh,
told me
yeah,
the
I already
answer,
told you
so
the
I don't
answer.
get- my guess was endurance.
That's a high energy thing. All right. Ding, ding, ding. Natalie gets the prize. So the first 2 months of lactation is the stage of life that requires more energy than any other stage in the horse's life. More so than a breeding stallion, more so than an endurance horse, more so than our growing horses. It is exponential because.
okay, you're going to tell us why.
Well, what I'm going to tell you why is because the horse's body gives preference to the foal. So anything that the foal is not, or might be, if the diet is lacking of anything, the horse's body is going to strip that from the mare to make sure that the foal gets what's needed. So they have a super high nutrient requirement as well as energy requirement because it has to not only supply them, but it has to supply their foal. And it's actually quite different from gestation. And even the last 2 months of gestation. Lactation is, like you're absolutely right, the highest expenditure. So, any questions about energy before we move on? All right. So the next thing we're moving on, and everybody knows about water. Water is important. Everybody cleans water troughs. Everybody fills them. Everybody does all this stuff. But my goal tonight was to provide y'all tidbits of information that perhaps maybe you didn't know. So that's my goal, and hopefully that's what you're going to get out of. Okay, so water is involved either directly or indirectly in virtually every physiological process in the horse. I told you already that death from dehydration, which would be a 15% loss of body water, can take less than 7 days. So access to water is absolutely critical. So it's important that we recognize how they can get this. So total body water of the horse is 61 to 72%. Just like us, they contain a lot of water, both inside the cell and outside the cell. So, we talked about this big tube that is the horse's gastrointestinal tract. Okay, in this gastrointestinal tract, the large colon, the cecum and the large colon, which make up the hindgut, actually acts as a reservoir for extra water. So I'm not sure if y'all have ever heard that before, but the body actually stores up water in that area of the hindgut for times when water might not be available or the horse is exercising very hard. And I'm going to come on to something in a second. But this gastrointestinal reservoir, that's what that means, actually contains 9 to 21% of this percentage right here. So it can actually be considered, you know, a very large percentage. The cecum is we call it a blind pouch. It's like a vat. It's about 3 feet long. Sits on the right side of the horse's body, and it's the fermentation pocket. It's where the body digests starches, not digests, ferments starches, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. So, some things that affect water intake, and this is where I'm kind of hoping to get to that stuff that maybe perhaps y'all haven't heard before, because this is fun. All right, so this represents, you could look at this as a hay field. You could also look at this as a pasture. It kind of depends on what time of year you're looking at it. So during the spring, this would be a pasture. Let's pretend like it's a lush pasture. It's full of moisture. A pasture that's full of moisture contains about 80% water. So I don't know if you've ever noticed your horses on pasture will actually drink less water than they do in the fall or maybe in the winter or when they're stalled. Is because they're actually consuming a lot of water in what they're eating. So in the fall, this drops to about 10% water. But what's really cool is research, and this is where I'm getting, these two books are like my little Bibles. This is where I get all my information. These are full of just amazing research. But research have actually found that horses who are fed high hay diets consume more water. So hay makes the horse drink water. So you want to keep that body full of fiber because it's going to go to the gastrointestinal tract and it's going to hold that reservoir of excess water. Okay. Another thing that affects water intake is, pretend like this was your horse's water source out in the pasture. Your horse might not be interested in drinking from this. There's some algal overgrowth. You don't know if maybe there's runoff from something. Maybe the farmer next door did some fertilizing that made it taste funny. Maybe there's cows in the field, and I don't know if y'all have ever seen cows in a pasture, but they pee in the water all the time. They pee and they poop in the water. So your horse may not really be interested in this. So those same things can be considerations when we're providing water for our horses at home. Same thing goes for water troughs. We want to keep them clean. We want to keep them, you know, my goats poop in my buckets all the time. You know, anyone who's ever cleaned out a stall where the horse has turned and pooped in the bucket, I mean, they're not going to drink that. So we need to make sure that it's free of debris. Sometimes older horses will collect hay or grass in their mouth, and so when they drink, it flushes out and it falls, and then it'll decompose and it'll kind of rot, and it'll give the water a funky kind of smell. So we want to make sure that we're, you know, keeping that clean and addressing that. Another thing along the lines of funny tasting water is if you've ever traveled with a horse or gone to a show or gone trail riding for the weekend, horses tend to not like new or different water. They'll typically drink out of like a fresh spring or something like that, but as far as like going to a showground and getting water out of a hydrant, they may not like that. So a trick that you can use to get your horse accustomed to drinking strange water would be adding a substance to the water about 1 or 2 weeks before you start traveling to get them used to a new smell, so you can take that new smell with you. And some things that could be like adding Kool-Aid to the water. It could be apple cider vinegar. It could be hay pellets. It could be any number, apple juice, any number of things that the horse likes. Now, of course, you don't want to add, you know, a 50-50 ratio of apple juice to water, because then we have a sugar problem, but enough to make the water smell differently. So snow is not a significant source of water to the horse. It takes a lot of energy to warm that snow up, so it's just not, it's not that great. And even though snow takes up a big volume, once it melts down, it's not a huge volume of water. So if it's snowing outside, don't think the horses are just eating snow and getting their water, because they're not. Now, horses who are outside in a cold environment don't really like icy water. They prefer what we call tepid water, and tepid water would be like lukewarm water. And I actually, in my notes, wrote down the exact temperatures. If anybody's interested in that, is anybody interested in that?
Yeah, I am.
Hold on. Hold on.
Do tell me.
Do tell you. Okay, if they're outside in the cold, they want water. It's about 66 degrees. So, not 65, not 67. They want 66 degree water. Now, if they are inside, if they are housed in a warm environment, they will drink cool water as well as warm water. So they'll drink about equal amounts of that. And the water temperature on that, they said icy water versus 73 degree water. So they'll actually drink warm water if they're housed in a warm environment. Okay? So, if you were a horse and you just ran 10 miles, okay, and you come in and you're all hot and sweaty, what temperature water do you think an exercising horse wants? Do you think they want warm water or do you think they want icy water?
I would want icy, but I think they pick one.
It's
Yeah, I
very
think they-
evidently a trick question.
Yeah.
So they actually prefer water that's between 68 and 83, and that kind of caught me off guard because I felt like that was really, really warm.
Yeah.
But cold water will not cause colic, it will not cause diarrhea, it will not cause them to cramp and tie up, etc., etc. Those are different metabolic problems. Icy water will not do that. However, they're going to drink more if you give them water that's not quite so cold. Isn't that interesting? Another thing, they did a study that compared different types of watering systems. So there's the flotation system where you have like a stock tank and there's a float in it. It kind of works like a float in your toilet. And when the water level goes down, then water comes out. Okay. Then they have a pressure system where the horse pushes, like you've seen those automatic waterers out in the pastures where they push something down and it fills. And then they had buckets. And so the horses actually preferred, even horses that were accustomed and had been habituated to all three of the different watering systems, preferred buckets. So if you have a choice on what to use, they prefer buckets. And they actually prefer deep buckets to shallow buckets. So after that, the flotation, and after that would be the pressure. So if anybody is putting watering systems in. The other thing about the like the pressure valve and the flotation valve is it's hard to monitor how much water your horse is drinking. So you can't go in the stall and go, oh look, they drank a whole bucket of water last night. They may not have drunk anything last night, which would be ding ding ding, you know, a red flag of perhaps something might be wrong. Okay, so that's water. Who's ready for the next question? Which one will encourage drinking? And I actually meant to change this slide. So let's pretend like it reads, which will encourage drinking? All of them. Ding, 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 yay! Circle gets a square. All of them will encourage drinking. So we talked about clean water, a salty water solution. So adding a little bit of water, and I think it's actually 0.63 grams of salt per 100 milliliters of water. Does that make sense to anyone? No. 24 grams per gallon creates a slightly saline water. And actually, at my farm, I have a slightly salty water bucket and then a regular water bucket, and they will drink out of both of them. Now, you cannot, hear me when I say this, you cannot provide only salt water. Then you end up with a serious problem and your horse could die. So, I mean, let's just put it simple. So, they always have to have access to fresh water if you are also providing salt. So, keep that in mind. A sweet water solution, and I have that also, 10 grams of sugar per 100, or actually glucose, it said, per 100 milliliters of water. So that would be like throwing in a handful of sweet pea to the bucket and getting them to drink. Okay, water around meal times. This is super interesting. I don't know if any of you have been like to a draft horse show or an event where there's draft horses. You can't put a 2-gallon bucket of water in a draft horse's stall and think that it's going to last more than 25 minutes. So what they do at these shows is they actually wheel around trash cans full of water, and the horses drink out of trash cans. So obviously you can't provide a trash can all day long. So what they do is they provide these trash cans full of water around meal times, because horses will drink. The majority of the time spent drinking is going to be 10 minutes before eating or 30 minutes after eating. So if you can only supply water during certain times, if you're showing, if you can't for a weekend, something like that, after they feed, they need access to water. And then provide tepid water. We've talked about that. Any questions about water? All right. I'm actually kind of staying on track with time. Kind of. I'm trying really hard. Okay. Protein comes from the Greek word proteos, which means of primary importance. Okay? So, when we look at the back of a feed bag, we see the guaranteed analysis. And in the guaranteed analysis are what words? What do we see in the guaranteed analysis?
The ingredients.
Well,
Or the
not the
breakdown
ingredients
of
list, the guaranteed analysis.
Exactly. It's in the bag.
Uh-huh. So it says blank and then it says something. So what's like, when you go to the feed store, okay, nobody does this, but if you were to go to the feed store, you would say, give me a bag of 12%. What's that 12% referring to? It's the protein. Yeah. So, and it says, if you notice on the bag, it doesn't say protein. It says crude protein. The reason it says crude protein is because that is simply a measure of nitrogen in that protein. Okay? So nitrogen, you can have some sources of protein with a very high level of nitrogen. You can have some with a very low level of nitrogen. It depends on what that mix is, because you need a quality source of nitrogen, otherwise the horse can't use it. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a second. So if you want to kind of like, your brain's all scrambled right here, so think about this. Horses have amino acid requirements, not protein requirements. Okay? So the horse cannot use protein. It can use amino acids. And amino acids are when that protein has been split apart into its smallest form of utilizable material. And that's where I bring in my famous quote again that y'all love so much. It says, separation of the indigestible from the digestible and the conversion of the latter, being the digestible, into forms suitable for living cells in the body. Okay? So when this nitrogen is broken down, there's some parts of it that can't be used by the body. It's looking for the amino acids. Okay? And so we're going to unscramble our brains for a second when we start talking about some details. Okay, protein contains 21 amino acids. There are 21 building blocks that work together in different ways to create a protein. Okay, these amino acids. 9 of these are essential, 6 are non-essential, and 5 are what we call conditionally essential. Okay, an essential amino acid means that the body has to consume it in order to get it. Okay, so essential means it is essential that I eat that nutrient. Okay, non-essential means when the horse eats the essential vitamins and it eats that whole protein molecule, it can actually pick a little bit from here, a little bit from here, and a little bit from here, and it can throw it all together like Legos and make an amino acid. Okay? So that means the body can make it itself. So non-essential means, doesn't mean the horse doesn't need it, it just means the horse doesn't have to consume that particular form. Okay? Conditionally essential means there are certain stages of life when the horse must consume a non-essential amino acid. For example, one of those is arginine. During periods of growth, the horse is growing faster than the body can supply arginine. So arginine has to be consumed by the horse. Kind of a lot, but that's kind of a high-level look. So protein is used in everything. So when we think protein, we think muscle, right? Well, protein is also used for, has anybody ever heard of hemoglobin? It's a protein that carries oxygen to all the cells of our body. It also functions in nutrient transport, okay? It shuttles nutrients from, one part of the body to the next. Metabolic function. Transport across the cell membranes. Our cells have these little walls and things have to get back and forth and they need something to transport them back and forth. Immune function and pH. Okay, so when we consume protein, I didn't realize how effective this was going to be. I thought I was going to pull it out like once. This is not the case. It gets used all the time. Okay, so when the horse consumes the protein, digestion is initiated in the stomach by hydrochloric acid. As it continues through the gastrointestinal tract, the majority of protein is absorbed in the small intestine. Okay, that's what we call the foregut. Okay, everything in front of the cecum we call the foregut. Okay, so if there's either so much protein that it gets all these absorption sites get full, then what happens is it overflows into the cecum and the body says, I can't do anything with this. It either repackages or excretes it. Okay. Yeah, I got that. So, or the protein could possibly be bound to fiber and it can't be released until it gets to the cecum. Once it gets to the cecum, the fiber is broken down by the microbes in the cecum, and then the protein is released, except there's no absorption sites there. Because remember we talked about round holes and square holes? All of your protein holes are up here. There's very few protein holes down here. So if your protein is released downstream, it can't go back upstream to get absorbed. So you got to think about digestibility of your protein when you choose to feed protein and what you're feeding. Okay, I'll just touch on this very briefly. So there's two types of protein deficiency, okay? One can be a deficiency from not consuming enough, okay? One can be a deficiency of not consuming enough of a specific amino acid, and that halts protein synthesis. And that will make more sense in just a second. So when you're looking at protein sources, these are your best sources: whey, soybean meal, and alfalfa meal. So when you're looking at the ingredients list on your feed tags, if you see any of these, it's generally going to be a good source of protein and highly digestible and available to your horse. So everybody take out your little bags. We're going to see an example. Oh, did you forget a little bag?
I forgot.
Let me get you a little bag. Sorry, video, I walked off on you. Okay. So amino acids, in order to make a protein, amino acid has to be assembled in a certain order. Okay? Oh, is it already put together? We'll take it apart.
We're gonna read it.
Or here, have mine. Have mine. Okay. So these amino acids have to be assembled in a certain order to make a protein. And this is the order that they have to be assembled in. They have to go pink, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. So we're going to make an amino acid out of this bracelet here. It's going to take just a minute. So pink, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. And actually, when I was making this slide, I was trying to remember which colors I had. So I'm kind of surprised that I remembered, because I didn't want to get up and go look at my little baggies. So y'all be happy that I got this slide right. Now I forgot to say, there's a little bit of a caveat, and that little bit of a caveat is you can't borrow feeds from anybody else. All you can do
My cat.
is your bracelet. Juniper, you can't steal it.
Trying to help, but she wants the protein.
Blue, purple. All right. Who's got all their proteins assembled? And they have to be in that order. If they're not in the order, let me know. Pink, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. So I have officially run out. I can no longer assemble proteins because, you know what? I'm missing an orange. And so even though I have a pink, I can't go from pink to yellow because that's not where my amino acids go. So in this case, orange would be what I call a limiting amino acid. And because there's not enough orange, protein synthesis stops. It doesn't matter how much blue I have, it doesn't matter how much green I have, how much pink I have. If I don't have another orange, I can't make any more. So that's the end of that. So that's why it's always important to make sure you're getting good sources of amino acids or good sources of protein so all of those amino acid needs to be met. So you can continue your protein synthesis. Any questions on protein? Are y'all hanging with me? Are y'all bored yet?
No.
No? Okay. Okay, so I want to introduce you to monogastric hindgut fiber fermenters, aka the horse. This is what your horse is. You take out this right here. If you talk to a scientist and you say, I have a monogastric hindgut fiber fermenter, they're going to ask you if you have a horse. Because this tells you the function of the horse's digestive system. Monogastric means they have one stomach. They're not like a cow, they're not like a goat, they're not a ruminant. They don't have two stomachs, okay? A hindgut fiber fermenter, okay? Their fiber is fermented in the hindgut, okay? And are y'all following when I say hindgut, foregut? Do I need to draw a picture? Y'all are good on that? Okay, so,
This is gonna be good.
so esophagus, stomach, small intestine, cecum. And y'all, this is crazy. The entrance and the exit of the cecum is separated by about 2 inches. It's called a blind vat. It goes in and comes out in about 2 inches space. I can't figure out the logistics of that. Like trust me, that's what we're gonna talk about at some point. Then you go into the large intestine, or the large colon, and then you've got a little pile on the stall. We got it? Ish. Okay, so look, I have another color. So the foregut is everything in front, so foregut and hindgut. The foregut is everything that's in front of the cecum, and the hindgut is everything that is behind the cecum. The cecum is kind of your dividing line. Okay? So, hindgut fiber fermenter, that means the fiber is being fermented back here. Okay? So, fiber is where horses get the majority of their energy. Like a huge portion of their energy from fiber fermentation. It's not digestion. Okay? And what I mean by fermentation is the horse cannot, this is going to sound crazy, the horse can't break down fiber on its own. The horse actually requires, the work of the microbes in the cecum to ferment the fiber and release volatile fatty acids for the horse to use as energy. It's not sugar, it's not protein, it's fiber where the body gets the majority of its energy. Did y'all follow that? Hopefully one day I'm going to do a talk on the microbiome because I love it. But when I talk about the microbiome, there's going to be a lot of talk involving the cecum and the fermentation that goes on right here. So there's two types of fiber or carbohydrates. There's fermentable and there's hydrolyzable. Fermentable is what we talked about. It's being fermented by the microbes, and we are all, who's not familiar with fermentation? Has anybody ever had a pickle or a beer? We know fermentation. So fermentation, and then hydrolyzable means that it can be broken down into simple sugars and be, and I wrote this specific, y'all give me a second, hydrolyzable, broken down by enzymes. I wanted to make sure I said that right. So the body actually produces enzymes that can break down those things, and all those things are done in the forehead. Okay? So, when you provide fiber or carbohydrates to your horse, you have to provide 1.2% body weight just in order to maintain gastrointestinal function. Okay? You can't give your horse less than 1.2% of its body weight and expect its gut to continue working appropriately. That's not how it's going to work because we have a monogastric hindgut fiber fermenter. Usually when I'm creating diets for horses, we play right here around this number depending on their life stage and body weight, which is 1.5 to 2.5. Okay. So, fermentable carbohydrates. And I think I touched on this already, but y'all may have some questions on this. So the hindgut, again, the microbes are doing all the work here. You're going to see this as NDF on a hay analysis. And when your NDF is right around 40 to 50, that means you have an ideal hay. It means it's not too mature. As your hay starts to creep up to that 55 to 60 on the NDF, then your horse is going to start what we call voluntarily reducing its dry matter intake. That's code for it's not going to eat it because it doesn't taste very good. This is going to be, that's going to be your really mature hay. And it's really, the more structural component you have in the fiber, the harder it is for your horse's body to break it down. Okay? Can be done, and it will be done. But structural components beyond this range just make it a little bit more challenging. That's where when I was talking about protein, for example, I had a hay a couple of years ago, and I always do an analysis on my hay. It had 10% protein, which is a decent protein profile, but its NDF was like around 57 or something like that. The horse looked terrible. And the reason being is because the protein was bound up in that fiber, and the body couldn't digest it up here where the circles are, which is where the protein needs to be digested. The protein was bound to the fiber back in this part of the gut. Once the fiber was broken down and the protein was released, it couldn't go anywhere. So,
My horse was also on that hay.
her horse also looked
Like
terrible.
we had gotten from the same, and it was just the weather had interfered so much with the
Yeah.
cutting. Like it was just how it happened. And so, but that whole year we were really,
Yeah, it was rough.
Both
It was a bad year. Okay.
our boys looked really bad.
And sometimes that's all you can do. And a high NDF on hay is actually not bad for an easy keeper. You know, a horse that just needs to eat some low calorie, you know, they're not going to sit there and just plow, you know, in a round bale up to their ears. They're going to, you know, pick at it because it's there, because it's fiber, they know they need it. And you can supplement the poor quality hay with proper nutrition. So I'm not saying there's not a place for high maturity hay in feeding a horse. I'm just saying that this is going to affect how much they eat voluntarily, because we all like the stuff that tastes good, right? So, any questions about that? And again, we have to say a big shout out to our microbes here. So, wanting to make sure we're keeping a healthy gut, and that is a whole other talk. So the next thing we're going to talk about briefly is our hydrolyzable carbohydrates. Don't y'all love this? This is probably like my favorite slide in the whole thing. So hydrolyzable carbohydrates, again, this takes place up in the foregut, okay? These are our sugars and our starches, okay? It's what provides energy, like that fast, quick energy. That's our race horses. Those are our cutting horses, our reining horses, our 3-day eventing horses, our jumping horses. They need fast, quick energy. Okay? There is a place for those. The place for those is not in the hindgut, because sugar that goes from the foregut into the hindgut creates things like Well, y'all tell me. Horse breaks into the feed room, what happens? Colic, laminitis, founder, they get the poops. I mean, yeah, all kinds of all kinds of bad things happen when those sugars cross that line from the foregut into the hindgut. Okay? So there is a place for feeding non-structural carbohydrates, aka sugar and starch. It's just not in the hindgut. So you have to make sure you're taking special care because starting to love this thing. Because I'm going to label this before our next one. I'm going to be like foregut, cecum. I might even put a balloon on it or something. Anyway, because our absorption sites for sugar are where? They're in the foregut. Okay? They're the circles. So we got to feed the body here, not down here. Okay? There are all sorts of levels of feed. And sugar and starch in those feeds. We've got like high NSC feeds, we've got low NSC feeds. Who's ever heard of a feed that is appropriate for EMS horses? Equine metabolic syndrome horses. Okay, it's appropriate for fat horses. You've seen it on the label. Low sugar starch. Let me tell you a secret, and it's a naughty secret, and it's a bad secret. Do you know what the requirements for the feed company to be able to market that as a low carbohydrate feed, appropriate for your horse that has equine metabolic syndrome? They have to put it on the label. That's the only requirement.
So it can be
It can be whatever they want it to
out
be.
the roof, but they can label it. And it,
Now, if they're smart, they're not going to make it out the roof because somebody's going to call them on it. But it doesn't have to fit within a certain parameter for them to call it low carbohydrate. So it's in your best interest to learn what these things mean, especially for your metabolic horse, your horse that is predisposed to laminitis or founder, any of those kind of things, your horse that's insulin resistant. You have to make sure that you are feeding those at appropriate levels to make sure you keep things like the horse's glycemic response in check after feeding. So, any questions about that? Y'all, I could seriously talk for like an hour on each one of these slides, so I'm just trying to hit the high points. So, moving on to our next question. Which statement is true? All carbohydrates are created equal. Fiber has little importance in a horse's diet. I don't need carbohydrates if I feed plenty of protein. Sugars and starches are absorbed in the foregut, and fibers are fermented in the hindgut. Ding! Erin, you haven't gotten one yet. D. Okay? So we've learned that all carbohydrates are not created equal. Some of them are fibers, and they're fermented. Some of them are sugars, and they're digested or broken down enzymatically. Fiber is of crucial importance in your horse's diet. It's the only way the horse's gut will function properly. I don't need carbohydrates if I feed plenty of protein. Protein is the most, what we call, metabolically expensive source of energy. It takes a lot of energy to access the energy in protein. Your body will not use, your horse's body, will not use protein unless it's void of carbohydrates and fats. So if your horse is using protein, that's bad, okay? You will smell excess protein in a horse's diet in ammonia in the stall. It's very expensive because what's happening is all that protein supplement that you just fed is getting peed up, and then you have to clean it up, and that's a bad idea. So don't feed protein for energy, bad idea. Okay, fats. Fats were originally used as a feed additive, okay? They were originally used to cut down on dust, on fine particles in the feed mill. It was used to kind of keep everything from, like, if you think about like grinding dry forage, you're gonna get a lot of dust. I mean, anyone with a barn with hay knows it's gonna get dusty. So what they did is they added what's called animal tallow. Do you know what tallow is? I had to look it up, I didn't know. It's the fat that surrounds animal organs. So they added that, right? See, there's your thing that you learned. So they added that to kind of cut down on that because the thinking was that horses can't use fat as energy because horses There's an organ that people have that horses don't have. Can you think of what it possibly might be? Oh,
Is it gallbladder?
it's a gallbladder. Horses don't have gallbladders. They secrete bile continuously. So it was originally thought that horses couldn't digest fat because they don't have a gallbladder, but it turns out horses can very efficiently digest fat, and it is an excellent energy source for horses. So in the last 30 years, we've seen things like high-fat feeds come onto the market, and it has been labeled or touted as a cool source of energy. Have we all heard that before? Probably so. Okay, so fats actually even have physiological benefits. Who is going to deny that feeding high fat makes your horse shine? Yeah, your horse starts looking bad, what are you going to do? You're going to add some flax, you're going to add some oil, we're going to shine that thing right up. And it's true. You want to make a shiny horse, you add some oil to the diet. This is our glycemic index stability. Any of you who are familiar with like insulin in people, fat has a very low insulin response. So you don't get those big spikes in insulin. And for some horses, that's very, very important. Actually, for most horses, that's very important. But what it does is it levels out basically your blood sugar. So then we're going to talk about energy. I've already touched on it. It's very highly digestible. In fact, I want to tell y'all this. Give me 2 seconds. 64 to 96% digestible. That's excellent digestibility right there. Okay? It actually contains 2.25 times more energy than carbohydrates, so it's very calorically dense. And it has been, talked about as being behavior altering. Horses that have been fed a high diet ration and studied have shown things like increased concentration, less what we call tractability during training. They're more focused. They complete tasks easier. They have less of a startle response, so they're less spooky. And probably several other things. Have any of y'all had experience feeding a high-fat diet versus a high-sugar diet that you want to share? Yeah?
I just noticed the jumpiness. It's, makes
Yeah.
a difference.
Yeah, it does make a big difference in kind of calming your horse down a little bit. So it can be behavior altering. If you've got a horse, I worked with a client whose horse was, first of all, she was a red mare, so she had that against her, But she was spicy and a little bit of a challenge, and we changed her diet away from those hydrolyzable sugars, those quick sugars, to fats, and she calmed down and was easier for this person to ride and to train. And she was able to focus on her job a little bit better, as well as increase a little bit of weight, because again, it's 2.25 times more calorically dense than our carbohydrates, our sugars. So we've got different sources of fat. We've got our plant oils, which would be, what's our number one plant oil we think about when we think about horses? Corn oil. What's another one?
What do they give? I don't know. I've
Vegetable
never done
oil?
the oil.
Yeah, vegetable oil.
Canola? What is canola?
Huh?
Is that, what's canola oil?
Canola oil is a vegetable
It is
oil.
a vegetable
Yes.
oil.
So yeah, all kinds of olive oil, plant oils that are sourced from plants. Then we've got our animal sources. That's that tallow we talked about. That's really not used anymore. And then new on the market, fresh on the interest, is what we call our marine sources. Oh, I forgot to mention, back here in plant oils, there's a new thing on the market. Has anybody heard of camelina oil? So camelina oil and flax. I can't believe we didn't mention those. So camelina and flax fall into plant oils. So marine sources, those are things like fish oil and algae and what was the last one? Fish oil, algae, seal blubber. How could I forget seal blubber? Yeah, not often used, but it is a marine source of fat and oil. So in the equine industry, you're going to see fish oil and algae used most often. Those are very popular right now because of their ratio of omega-3s to 6s. So
How do they compare to flax?
they're better than flax.
What's
The
the
night-
matcha oil?
Matcha? I don't know. I haven't heard of that before.
Purina.
Oh, are you talking about Match, Omega Match?
Yeah.
That's, oh shoot, I know it. It's on the top of my head. I know exactly what you're talking about. But what they're doing is they're trying to play on the, it's, Omega Match is, it fits a very niche market. It doesn't have your soy in it. I don't think it has alfalfa in it, but it supplies a good source of fat from, is it AHI flour?
Yes, yeah.
I want to say ahi, but I don't think it's ahi.
I don't know how you pronounce it, but that's.
I
I'm not
know
even
we've talked
heard of
about it. Again, it's sort of a niche. It's a little expensive, but it does feel, when consumers want something, feed companies tend to respond. When they want a low carb feed, your feed companies are going to start coming out with low feed. When they want something high in omega, they're going to start coming out with something high in omega. When they don't want soy and they don't want alfalfa, they're going to do the same thing. Did you get it pulled up?
Was it spelled inmates matcha?
No, Omega Match. Look up Omega
yeah,
Match.
Sorry,
by
yeah.
Purina.
Omega match.
So it's going to fall in this plant oil source. that we
Ahi
talked-
flour.
Yeah.
AHI.
I knew it was AHI, but I couldn't make it right in my head. But again, it's going to be one of those good sources of the omega 3 to 6 ratio things. So then we're going to move on to our next question. Did you know that fat can actually go rancid? If you take fat and you leave it out in your 100-degree tack room or feed room or barn or whatever, it's going to start stinking and getting funky.
How do you, like, time-wise, it should not be risked at all, or is there like
It
a
depends
2-week
on
period?
it depends on what kind of oil you have. Some of these oils will go rancid much quicker than other oils. For example, and I'm just using these because they're frequently used in the equine industry. Flax oil versus camelina oil. Flax will go rancid much faster than camelina will. Okay, so when you're choosing your oils, you need to think about where it's going to be stored, if it's going to be in a temperature controlled area. What are you looking for when you choose your fat supplement? Are you looking for shine, or are you looking for an omega profile, or are you looking for both? Does your horse need to lose weight? Does it need to gain weight? So those are all things that need to be considered. Fat sources aren't always balanced. If you're not getting rice bran, let's say you want to put fat on your horse or weight on your horse, let's say you go get some rice bran because you want to add some weight, you want to add some extra calories. If you're not getting it from a source that has balanced out those nutrients, you're going to be getting an inverted calcium to phosphorus ratio. When you do that, you're putting your skeletal system of your horse at risk because you want to make sure your calcium is higher than your phosphorus. Most big companies, your Triple Crowns, trying to think of who else has a rice bran supplement. Triple Crown's the one that I'm thinking of right now. I bet Purina. I think Purina just came out with one. But they're going to be fortified in a way that gets those ratios balanced back up. Too much fat can disrupt the GI system because what happens is the fat floods into the cecum right here, and basically the microbes go,
It just flushes.
this is not what we eat. And they either die or they freak out and start releasing all these crazy gases and stuff. So you don't want, just like we don't want a whole lot of sugar getting downstream, we don't want a whole lot of fat getting downstream either. We want that absorbed up top. Okay? Overfeeding fat to a malnourished horse can be fatal. So if we read this, the first couple of slides, fat is great as a source of nutrients. Fat is, or not a source of nutrients, as a source of energy. Fat puts weight on a horse. Fat doesn't mess with their glucose balance. And so we get in, let's say we adopt a malnourished horse and we start feeding them fat, we can kill them. So that's called overfeeding syndrome. There's a whole lot of other components that go into that, but don't think that that's
throw in
gonna be
that.
your solution to a malnourished horse. All right, we are nearing the end. We're gonna skim through our vitamins real quickly. Vitamins are organic compounds divided into fat-soluble and water-soluble, okay? Fat-soluble vitamins means they're stored in the body's fat stores, basically, and they can also be dissolved in fat. So fat-soluble vitamins stay with your horse a lot longer than water-soluble vitamins. Water-soluble vitamins can get excreted and flushed out of the system pretty quickly. Yes, ma'am?
So the vitamin E, for
Uh-huh.
instance, like when we were talking about that, you were explaining it's a fat soluble
Mm-hmm.
vitamin.
Uh-huh.
So when using vitamin E capsules, we needed to look at how those capsules were made. Now this is way back, but I
Way
was just
back
trying to put
when?
it together. So when I would look at vitamin E human capsules to add, I needed to see oil in the ingredients.
And vitamin E is something we could talk about for another hour.
Right. So anyway,
But, that's something,
well, my follow-up was that's why when you said fat soluble stays in the body longer,
that's
when
valuable stored in the body.
stored in the body longer. So just like the vitamin E from the grass, a lot of times they're getting their minimum requirement.
Horses
Like-
are miraculously created and designed to function in spite of our best efforts to kill them. So, horses are designed that during times when the grass is growing and there's plenty of vitamin A and there's plenty of vitamin E, and they're going to need that when there's no grass in the winter, God said, you know what? I'm going to make sure they have plenty of vitamins to get them through times of barrenness, times when there's no green. And you'll see I have on here chase the green. Well, chase the green can apply to us, with eating our vegetables, but it also applies to our horses. The deeper, the richer the color, the more vitamin source there is. So they're designed, you eat the dark green pastures during the spring and during the summer. When the fall and the winter, all the green goes away, they still have their sources of vitamin E and vitamin A, because the other cool thing is these water-soluble vitamins, the body can make them,
Really?
right?
Huh.
So the body can actually make their minimum requirements of water-soluble vitamins. So not only do they have the ability to store their fat-soluble vitamins through the periods of time when they don't have access, they also have the ability to make their own. Right?
Very cool.
Is that I didn't know that for the slide?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, in that whole thing, let's say we have a horse that is on a dry lot and being fed hay only. Well, bad news is the pasture that's all green and beautiful in the summer and we cut it for hay, the second it gets cut, those vitamins start degrading. So as your color starts going away, so do your vitamins. To the point where when that hay is about 6 months old, you pretty much don't have any vitamin A or vitamin E left in that hay. So you need to make sure you're supplementing, especially for a horse who's on a dry lot. That's why it's important to know how much intake your horse is getting, to know if they're going to have enough to get them through the winter. Which is another reason why serum vitamin E tests are so critical, because horses are just as unique as we are, and they metabolize vitamin E differently. Just because you and I eat the same amount of vitamin E doesn't mean that you're not going to burn through it faster than I am. It doesn't mean our levels are going to be the same. It doesn't mean our horses' levels are going to be the same just because they're on the same pasture and just because they're getting the same ration.
So the test,
Completely independent.
how often should you test your
Yearly.
horse?
Yearly. And if they get put on a new diet, about 6 weeks after that diet.
So, for dry lot horses then, where the diet really doesn't fluctuate much year round, are there certain times a year that would be better to test, like before going into the winter or coming out of the winter?
Usually, I believe what we've talked about is like January, like
Okay.
fall before the first of the new year to see where you are.
So don't wait till like the end of the winter time.
Don't
You're
wait till
trying-
the end of the
okay.
winter. You want to catch an impending deficiency before it becomes a deficiency.
And if a horse is deficient, what type of symptoms?
Sometimes,
Like for people who they just aren't gonna test. Like,
sometimes you're not gonna see it
okay,
until it becomes what we call like a disease state.
and it's too.
But
it's too
well,
far.
it's not too late. Unless it becomes a serious problem, it can be turned around. Vitamin E deficiency can be turned around unless it has just gotten too far.
Okay.
Or and there's always a little bit of a genetic code, a genetic component to that. Like we talked about metabolizing stuff faster. It could be that you're supplying adequate. Your horse is just burning through
Okay.
it, and you
I
need to
gotcha.
identify those kinds of things.
Gotcha.
So, there's a whole lot more I can get into.
Yeah,
that.
I'm sure.
So I'm just gonna go to the next slide. So
Sorry,
actually,
I can.
I wanna identify these real quick. Okay, it's 7:15. We'll skip these, because otherwise y'all are gonna be cranky at me. I'm gonna skip them. I'm skipping them.
You can do like 10-second, just list
Do you,
10 seconds.
do you have time?
Yeah, alright.
Because we just
I'm
have this in the
curious.
middle.
I am really curious.
Well, and plus, how are you gonna like win the quiz if we skip the instruction? Okay, so vitamin A. What do you think vitamin A?
Eyes,
Eyesight, night vision.
Mhm.
All of these things function in a lot of different ways in the body. What I'm doing is giving you like the easy things, the things that are gonna like make you remember. Okay, so vitamin A is eyes. What do you think this one is?
D.
D, vitamin D. Okay, so vitamin D is absorbed, well, vitamin D is not absorbed through the skin. It's made through receptors, well, anyway, don't care about that. So vitamin E comes from the skin. You need to be aware, horses are very seldom deficient in vitamin D unless they're like kept in a stall.
Yeah.
So you need to be aware if your horse has an injury, okay, make sure they're not in a stall with like no windows. Make sure they have access to going outside. Make sure they have a little bit of turnout opportunity because you want to make sure. Now, vitamin D is also very important when for the skeletal matrix for bone formation. So we think, who all comes to this conclusion? My horse broke a leg, I'm going to give it vitamin D. Over supplementing vitamin D, y'all didn't know this until I was preparing for this, can cause calcification of the aorta,
Oh gosh.
the kidneys,
Wow.
the respiratory system. Guess what? They all fail.
Yeah.
So, vitamin D supplementation is very seldom needed. Plus, let's remember, it's a fat-soluble vitamin, so it's going to stay with your horse for a while. Okay? Okay, vitamin E is very closely associated with the muscle. You're going to see it in symptoms like tying up, in coordination, muscle weakness, oftentimes like deficiency in like the rump muscles, things like that. Sometimes it's that like, are they on, are they off, are they weird? They're just not right, So, often associated with muscles. Okay, vitamin K, clotting, blood clots, things like that. What's interesting is, okay, everybody loves vitamin E, right? Everybody, every Facebook group, everything, feed vitamin E. Your horse has the sniffles, feed vitamin E. Your horse is bay and you want it to be chestnut, feed 10,000 units of vitamin E, right? Okay, well what's interesting is all of these things talk to each other. The body is a whole unit. So vitamin E can have a conflicting relationship with vitamin K, and it can actually become like an anticoagulant, have an anticoagulant effect. And you can start seeing symptoms like bleeding from the nose. You've heard of bleeders, like barrel horses and such. We had a presenter just a couple weeks ago who was talking about vitamin E, and she was saying a vet actually called her with a horse that presented with bleeding, and they said, oddly enough, the horse was receiving excessive amounts of vitamin E, and her response was, stop the vitamin E by all means. Let's stop that first, and then let's figure out if there's a problem. So these kind of talk to each other and exist in a relationship. So we can't just like throw
Throw a bunch of
supplements
stuff at 'em.
and feed and throw stuff to our horse thinking that more is better because more is not better. Our B vitamins work function in synthesizing energy. What do y'all think this is? What vitamin do you think this is? B7, biotin. And we all think biotin functions in the hoof. That's all biotin is used for, right? It's involved in almost every single function in the body. Who knew?
Wow.
Right? There's your aha for this slide.
Wow.
Okay, so biotin is just, I mean, the hoof is just a very, very, very small fraction of that vitamin. And you know what else is interesting? The body makes these. So the horse's body produces its minimal amount of, or an adequate amount of vitamin B7, biotin. And not all horses respond to biotin supplementation, especially if a whole lot of other factors aren't in line, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And then vitamin C, also synthesized by the body. We're almost done. I'm going as fast as I can. Okay, so name that vitamin. Ooh, this is a trick. I forgot to tell y'all this. 2 vitamins that are antioxidants.
D.
And?
And vitamin, C.
No.
Okay. A is also an antioxidant.
Yes, A, that's right.
Yep. Think ACE. ACE.
A's, that's right.
Uh-huh. Okay. This is taken up by almost every cell in the body, y'all. I literally just said.
Right.
Yes. Over supplementation can have fatal consequences. Hmm?
No.
I couldn't hear what you said.
No. No.
Rotate one to the right. No, to the left. Go left one. On our circle. Go left.
D.
D. Okay. Deficiency is often implicated in muscle myopathies and has been suggested to have a spectrum of disease states.
E.
Ooh, I didn't tell you all this either. Excess can be a concern for growing foals. A. True story, y'all. So there is an incident of a feed company. Have y'all ever heard of tag dressing? Tag dressing is where like feed companies get in a feed war and they're like, I'm going to put a big long list of ingredients and everything on the guaranteed analysis, and I'm going to put as much of everything as I can on there, whether it's needed or not, and I'm going to list it in the ingredients, even if there's just a minuscule amount. I'm going to make my feed on paper look really, really, really good. So one particular feed was designed for all classes of horses, including growing foals. Well, when fed at the rate suggested by the feed bag, vitamin A was actually toxic.
Wow.
That's a problem. So, excessive vitamin A can be especially concerned for growing foals.
Mm.
All right, last area, minerals. Okay. They're divided into what we call macro minerals and trace minerals. Okay. Our macro minerals are provided in grams. Our micro minerals or trace minerals are provided in milligrams. You will see them on your feed bag. Macro will be a percent. You'll see like calcium, 10%, 6%. I can't come up with a good number. And then you'll see like copper, 30 ppm. ppm is the way they list that unit for milligrams per kilogram. That tells you how many milligrams are in a kilogram of that particular whatever. Okay? These are required in very, very small amounts by the body because the body has very, very, very little tolerance to get rid of it. It doesn't like excesses of these minerals. Okay? There's no mineral sink in equine tissue, meaning there's no storage site for these things. So they get gone because the body doesn't want them. We're going to skip that. Okay, so the minerals we're going to talk about are macro minerals, are these up here at the top. Calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, and electrolytes. Calcium is responsible for our bone matrix, okay? It exists in a relationship with phosphorus. This is what we call big head disease, is when there's an excess of phosphorus in the body. and not enough calcium to balance it out. So what happens is the phosphorus actually pulls calcium out of the bones, creates a softening of the bone and deformation of the skeletal system. Magnesium has been implicated for horses with excitability, though at this point it's not proven. Electrolytes is crucial to manage those balance, especially during hot times like what we have coming up. There's a whole thing we can talk about electrolytes. Just know that when your horse sweats out of the pasture, okay, it loses water because water is how the horse cools itself, right? Okay, well what happens is when that water leaves the body, the salt concentration of the blood plasma actually increases, okay? Because of that salt concentration, because the water is going out, think of it as a salty solution inside the horse's body, the salt increases, it makes the horse, what? Thirsty, okay? Well, when your horse sweats during exercise, it loses a massive quantity of these electrolytes, with our electrolytes being potassium, chloride, and sodium. So what happens if all of a sudden that sweat goes from being mostly water to a large part of it being sodium and chloride and potassium? What was in the body, which was making us thirsty, which was salt, because we lost a bunch of water, is now gone. So what happened to your horse's thirst response? It's not there. So we think we exercise our horse, oh, they're just not thirsty. They're not, because they don't have a thirst response, because that salt didn't go up. That's why electrolyting is so important, or providing a saltwater solution, okay? And if all you can do is provide salt for your horse after exercise, and I don't mean just a salt block, again, that's a rabbit hole, do so, because your horse needs that salt to be replaced in order to be thirsty again.
Because that's one issue I have. Mine will not take electrolytes. They won't eat them, they won't drink them, they won't touch them, but they'll take loose salt.
They will take
They
loose salt.
will take loose salt. Is that
Provide loose salt.
okay, or should I try to cut it with the electrolytes?
Unless
Because there's no
your
potassium, correct? In the salt.
forage is extremely rich in potassium. Very seldom do you ever
Okay.
have to supply potassium in your
Okay.
diet, unless that you are exercising at this level.
All right.
Okay.
But for
Um,
my pasture pups, loose salt,
Salt is
is
fine.
okay.
As long as they're consuming it. The best form of salt between salt blocks, Himalayan salt, loose salt, the best salt source is the salt they will consume. If you spend $20 on a salt on a rope that you can hang on the wall, that you have pictures of these Sherpas climbing the mountain to dig out the side of the mountain, and your horse will eat that, by all means, pay the $20. If your horse will eat salt out of a pan on the floor, by all means, throw some salt on the floor. Just make sure your horse is getting salt, because almost all horses are sodium deficient, because it is very hard for them to consume enough on their own.
How much minimum? Sorry, go ahead. How much minimum should
I would
they
have to
consume?
pull this book out for you.
Mhm.
I can't quote a number off the top of my head, but the number's in here.
Mhm.
So,
So-
you with me later.
So what, I might have missed something. What is in play when you have a horse that wants the play? Is there a mineral or that they're seeking?
If you don't have an analysis of that clay, it could be horses lick dirt, eat poop, do all these things for various reasons. And one of the big reasons is curiosity. Horses
Or
don't
boredom.
have these.
Yeah.
They don't have opposable thumbs. They can't pick this up and go, oh, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
So if I were a horse, what would I have to do? It's my only way of exploring the world. It's how they explore each other. It's how they explore you. They're very sensitive. Those whiskers on their face, they're very tactile. So a lot of times when your horse is licking something or eating something, it can be curiosity. They could just like the taste of something. So you can't say elements or minerals on their own. If you've ever smelled straight copper, or it wouldn't be straight copper, but if you've ever smelled copper or zinc, they're disgusting. your horse is not gonna eat it. You know, there's a thought that horses will seek out these minerals on their own. I would say it's highly unlikely. And if they do, how do you know if they're getting their recommendation? Because not only do they have to meet their recommendation, but they also don't have a mineral sink. You know, so there's all sorts of things to think about. Okay, sulfur is critical. A part of like methionine and cysteine are amino acids, methionine being an essential amino acid. Sulfur is like a game changer for poor hoof quality because it provides the cross-linking bonds in keratin. So it has been proposed that as we've been cleaning up the atmosphere and reducing acid rain, which has a high quality of sulfur, what happens to our soils and our forages? They decrease in their quality of sulfur. So if our horse is consuming less sulfur, what's happening?
Hoof
It could
quality is
potentially
sulfur.
be affecting our hoof quality. Okay, iron. There's a lot of chatter out there about iron. I will tell you that iron is very, very, very tightly regulated by the body. The horse's body has no way of excreting excess iron. It's not going to let in any more than it absolutely has to. It is regulated so tightly. Unless those components of the body, those hormones in the body that regulate that have a breakdown, and there are instances where there can be a breakdown, your horse's body will not absorb excess iron. Another thing, primary anemia in horses is very, very unlikely. And primary anemia is when there's a shortage of iron in the horse's diet. That would be a primary, that means there's not like an ulcer bleed or a dysfunction or a disease state that is causing the anemia. Primary anemia you're almost never going to see in a horse because the horse naturally consumes a huge amount of iron, naturally, because forages are very, very high in iron. Last couple of things, copper, we want to say, I'm going to feed copper because it's going to make my horse gorgeous. Not always necessarily the case. And copper can be stored in the liver. You don't want copper hanging out in the liver in excess amounts. So, again, we always want to think about when we're feeding these things, how's it getting out? Don't just feed it. Zinc, again, it's very important in skin, immunity, all these things. Selenium, everyone be aware, everyone hear what I'm saying, not what I'm not saying. What I'm saying is we live in a selenium deficient area. It's critical that you are making sure your horse is getting the proper amounts of selenium. It is also critical that your horse is not receiving toxic levels of selenium, okay? Because that's bad. Selenium is an extremely potent antioxidant for your horse, extremely potent. You'll often see it packaged with vitamin E. I personally don't like that because we want to make sure we're getting enough of each one, not overdosing one and not the other, okay? So, interesting thing, here's your interesting thing for the slide. Okay, selenium toxicosis, meaning we're getting too much selenium, starts as, well, I should have approached this completely differently. Okay, this particular toxicity begins with reddening at the coronary band, swelling at the coronary band, a horizontal crack at the coronary band. What is it? It's an abscess. No, it's not. It's selenium toxicosis. Because then what happens is your horse's whole hoof capsule comes off. So when we see those symptoms, it is normal for us to go straight to, oh, it's just an abscess. They'll be fine. When we see these symptoms, let's evaluate our diet and see. Because it is very easy to provide a feed that has been fortified with selenium, provide a vitamin E selenium supplement that has selenium, provide a hoof supplement that has selenium, and a lot of times when you're feeding something that has selenium in it, it may have a warning on it that says do not provide with other sources of selenium because these feed and supplement manufacturers recognize how dangerous this can be.
So what is that level range?
I'd have to look in my book,
Mhm.
but it's much lower than you might think.
That's what I was about to
Yeah.
ask, if it is easy to
It's
fall
not.
into that.
Put it this way, your horse required, generally a 1,000-pound horse is going to require like 2 to 3 milligrams That's a very, very small amount. So,
Wow.
yeah, it's a very, very small amount. And usually people get into trouble unintentionally when they're providing different supplements, when they're just like kitchen sink supplementing. Okay? All right, last one for the day. Okay, exists in a ratio with
Calcium.
phosphorus. What?
That's it.
Calcium. Not proven to help with excitability. Magnesium. Problematic during times when mash brands were fed. I might have forgotten to tell you all this one. Phosphorus. Bran is very high in phosphorus. Very high in phosphorus, and it pulls calcium. This was like back in the day when horses were working horses and they fed bran
Yeah.
mashes like every Sunday.
Yeah.
Critical to maintain hydration. Yes. Implicated in bleach coats, but stored, ooh, that should have had a D. Stored in the liver.
Copper.
Copper. Deficiency is very rare in horses. I think that was also magnesium. Exists in an actual ratio with copper. There are a few minerals that have a ratio. Calcium and phosphorus have an actual ratio, and zinc and copper have an actual ratio. Iron does not exist in an actual ratio. On paper, yes, you can say they go together. In this book, they don't go together. And until this book tells me they go together, they don't go together. Easily becomes toxic but critically important. Selenium. Oh my gracious. Are we done?
Look how cute.
Y'all, it's been good. I took like 3 minutes overtime,
That's good. It's good.
It's very good.
but I have a hard time. Once I get going, I mean, I just roll. But anyway,
Well, it's a lot of.
it is a lot
Yeah,
of
and there's
You
so
information.
many
just
rabbit
were
holes that you
touching,
go into
right.
that you did really great. Keep it up right there.
Once I started putting this together, I was like, shoot, I shouldn't have called this necessary nutrients, because I just, so really this is totally high level stuff. Just very, very high level stuff. So,
Well, and two, like, one
There's a
question
lot.
I had was, it depends on, like, I assume everything you hit on right now is for, like, when you have those special cases, does it change the intake and the output and the, like, you got a horse with Cushing's, that changes the game
Yeah.
on some things. You got a horse with UPN, or what was it? PSSM. What is the, not PSSM,
HYPP?
that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
Changes the game.
that's where I struggle, because coming up against so many different, my clients like so many different horses. It's just, there's not a one size fits all. It's
Yeah.
just not.
And this is,
And that's where it's hard when we're in this information age, and then you throw in marketing on top of it, and you throw in all these companies that aren't required to tell the whole truth about what they're selling. So like, I have clients with horses that are clearly insulin resistant, and they're like, well, this feed says it's safe, and I have to say, you need to check. Like, there's no guarantee.
yeah,
And that's just what's scary about it, is there's so many options now
yeah.
that all say this is okay.
And,
Anyway.
you know, really the last place you want to go for information is Facebook, you know? Unless, okay, I will say, Dr. Mote manages a Facebook group. It's called Equine Nutrition Education. And she and Michaela are the only ones that put out information on this. It's not a forum for people to go on there and chatter about how, you know, how Aaron can solve my horse's problems. It's an area where the information can be put out that is factual, that's scientific, that's backed up, to provide information for you to use and apply. And this is not designed to solve the problems, you know, of your clients or whatever. It was designed to educate you so you're more aware of what you're seeing and what you're doing and understanding the implications of being educated.
Yeah.
You know, so that's really my goal of doing these things, is educating people and obviously I love teaching and I love talking and, you know, I enjoy it.
That's very helpful.
So anyway, thank y'all so much for coming. Please fill out a little bit of feedback, let me know. Our next talk is the 18th, and the title is SOS, Scoop on Supplements.
It's gonna be a good one.
That's gonna be a good
I'm
one.
a little nervous about getting out there about that, but there's a lot of truth that needs to be stated, you know, about supplements. So if you have any supplements you want me to look up before then, send me a Facebook, send me a message, do whatever. I would love for y'all to bring your supplements, and I will do the best I can to answer them on the fly.
Would like
Um,
Outlast or
Bring it.
Bios be
Bring it. Let's talk
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
I love talking about some probios. I
So
love
basically,
talking about some outlets.
Anything,
Anything you want to bring,
anything.
bring it. We'll
But
talk
you,
about
but
it.
ideally, you'd like us to try to Facebook you ahead of time.
I would love a little bit of heads up.
All right.
Because
No,
I
yes.
really don't want to say, I've never seen that before, let me get back on you. There may be an instance, if it's a group like this, I don't have any problem Googling it and giving you the information that
Off
I
the
can
cuff,
on
yeah.
the fly. You know,
But we'll help you.
But-
I've got some I can go ahead and
Yeah.
send.
in order to provide
Ahead
the
of time.
best information I can, it'd be great. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's a very interesting world out there, and I do have to provide some good information before we get into the Q&A about the supplement specifically, because there's some things y'all need to know about the supplement world.
Okay.
So,
Awesome. Looking
Anyway.
forward to it.
like I said, thank y'all so much for coming. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for
It's great.
tolerating.
Thank you.
Very, very informative.
But
So much to learn, really.
tell me about it.
Wait.
Huh? Bye to the camera. Bye, Jen.